Our perception of a situation is also influenced by our mental schemas, that is, our mental representations of categories of objects, events, and people. For example, most people have a mental schema of a football match, which is a collection of images. It might include the ground, the players, the noise, crowds, and even hot dogs. Such mental schema may be unhelpful, as an actual situation may be colored by the content of the mental schema. For example, the question, "Was there a hot dog stall there?" may be answered by, "Well, there usually is. I expect there was one there." Our perception of the world is greatly influenced by our vision, and the lesson on cognition looks at this in detail. However, it is worth recalling here that near objects occlude or obscure distant objects, whilst objects at a distance lose their clarity, making it difficult to judge form and size, and their angle, subtended at the retina, becomes smaller with increased distance. Retinal size is of particular importance to the pilot. For example, in the final stages of an approach, the pilot is likely to judge his height above the ground from the retinal size of the runway. To make this judgment, however, he must have a stored expectation of the likely size and slope of the runway. For example, if the runway slopes up more than he expects, it will appear larger than he expects, and it will give the impression that he is too high and going to overshoot. He may then fly lower, in order to comply with the expected visual model of being 3 degrees above an assumed flat runway, but his flight path will end short of the runway. We can see from the information processing model that the central decision maker is served by the short-term and long-term memories. It is the attention mechanism which selects what information is passed to the short-term memory. Information can be stored here for up to 20 seconds, but it will then be lost. This may be long enough for its use. For example, approach air traffic control may tell the pilot to change frequency to ground air traffic control.
Ground is on 121.9er.
Lufthansa 411, the old cockpit, 0.9er. Hello.
The pilot will remember the new frequency long enough to use it, but he will then forget it. Acoustic information is considered easier to retain than visual information, as it is easier to rehearse in full. For example, telephone inquiries may give you a number, and you will no doubt repeat this number to yourself until you have finished using it, and then it will be binned. The short-term memory is also limited in the amount it can contain. It is considered that an average person can retain 7 plus or minus 2 unrelated items. Read this list once and see how much of it you can repeat in the correct order. It's not easy. But it is easy to improve the number of remembered items, for example by association. Make a story out of the words. Alternatively, create a mnemonic out of the first letters of the words, even adding letters, such as vowels, to make sense out of the letters. In the case of numbers, divide them into chunks of 2 or 3, as is done by the French telephone network. Try these 2 lines of numbers and see which is easier to remember. The short-term memory can easily be displaced by an interruption or a new stimulus. For example, if you have been given a telephone number, which you are trying to remember, and then you are given another number, it is highly likely that the first number will be displaced by the second, or that neither number is remembered. The long-term memory receives information from the short-term memory which has been rehearsed, and it will be stored indefinitely. For example, the alphabet learned in primary school will be remembered forever once it has been rehearsed and hence learned properly. There are three categories of long-term memory: semantic, episodic, and procedural. The first two are known as declarative memory. The semantic memory stores general knowledge of the world, storing information which enables us to answer such questions as, "Do all birds fly?" It is believed that the semantic memory holds concepts that are represented in a dense network of associations. It is generally thought that once information has entered the semantic memory, it is seldom lost. When we are unable to remember a word, it is because we are unable to find where the word in the semantic memory is stored, not because it has been lost from the store. Episodic memory stores events or episodes in one's life. For example, seeing a wedding. Episodic memory is not as accurate as semantic memory. Episodic, more than semantic memory, is subject to influence and deterioration. It is heavily influenced by one's assumption about what happened. For example, one might remember a young person lying on a pavement. But this image may be incorrectly interpreted as a person who was drunk, whereas the person may have had a fit or had been assaulted. One might add on non-existent images, such as beer cans, and other people, because one has seen a beer bottle in previous similar situations. Time will also reduce the clarity and accuracy of episodic memory. Similarly, variations may appear on repeating the story, but the teller believes the revised version to be accurate. Recollection of events can also be influenced by suggestion. For example, when asked to estimate a car's speed, the answer may be higher if the questioner asks, "What speed was the car doing when it screeched round the corner?" Amnesia affects episodic memory more than semantic memory. After a head injury, a person may be unable to remember an event, such as a wedding, episodic memory, but will still be able to take the lift to the 8th floor, semantic memory. There are two forms of amnesia. One is called anterograde amnesia, in which new events in the short-term memory are not transferred to the permanent, long-term memory. The sufferer will not be able to remember anything for more than a brief period after it occurs. The other type is called retrograde amnesia, which is an inability, beyond ordinary forgetfulness, to recall some memory of the past. There are several causes of amnesia, such as a head injury, a stroke, a viral brain infection, a tumor, or a severe emotional shock, known as dissociative amnesia. Not being able to remember last night's heavy drinking is not a symptom of amnesia. Alcohol abuse can result in events not being transferred from short-term memory to long-term memory. Long-term alcohol abuse, resulting in a vitamin B1 deficiency, can cause permanent damage to the memory function. Let us go back to the model. The long and short-term memory inputs and stimuli have been interpreted into a perception of the situation, and so a decision is made as to what action to take. For example, on seeing a temperature gauge go into the red, a pilot may throttle back the power. This action will have consequences which must be reviewed. The action will produce another stimulus, such as a temperature gauge going down if the action was successful. However, if the pilot throttles back the wrong engine, the high temperature will remain, and the pilot will have to review his actions and the problem. As we saw earlier, semantic and episodic memories are known as declarative memories. The third type of long-term memory is procedural memory, sometimes called non-declarative memory. A characteristic of procedural memory is that it involves a skill, something that is difficult to explain in words. An example of this is riding a bicycle or flying an aeroplane. Skills such as juggling, which may have required active concentration during the learning stage, can be executed independently of the decision-making process. These are called motor programs or motor skills. You will see from the model that there is a direct link from the attention mechanism to motor programs and onto actions without reference to the central decision maker. To develop a motor program, there are three distinct phases. The cognitive phase comes first, in which the learner thinks consciously about each individual action, such as learning to serve in tennis. Then comes the associative phase, in which the separate components of the overall action become integrated. Finally, the automatic phase, when the total maneuver can be executed smoothly without conscious mental effort. It is the ability to fly using these motor skills that enables the pilot to send and receive RT messages without losing control of the aircraft. The motor program flies the aircraft, and the central decision maker deals with the communication. However, when the process of flying becomes non-routine, as in an emergency, the pilot may need to go back temporarily to the associative phase, thereby using conscious learning and decision-making. One can use the analogy of changing from autopilot to manual flying. These three phases, the cognitive phase, the associative phase, and the automatic phase, are also called declarative knowledge, knowledge compilation, and procedural knowledge. Students must be familiar with both sets of terms.